to be zealous is good. But if you're zealous for the wrong reason, or you're zealous in the wrong way, not only is it not a mitzvah, it's an avera that can technically turn into chilul Hashem. Now, everyone thinks that their rabbi is great. If he wasn't great, he wouldn't be a rabbi. I personally think my rabbi is the best rabbi in the world. You want to debate? I'll debate you for as long as you want. He's the best rabbi in the world. And I'm sure you think your rabbi is the best in the world. Everyone thinks their rabbi is the best in the world. It's very easy to think that your rabbi is Mashiach. Very easy. I understand it. I'm telling you. If Hashem asks me who should be Mashiach, I say, my rabbi should be Mashiach. The problem is not Chassidut. The problem is when Chassidut turns into idolatry. The problem is when people turn their rabbi into an idol. That's the problem. Because that not only is the obvious sin of idol worshipping, you're not allowed to worship your rabbi, it doesn't matter even if he's Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why Hashem did not tell us where he buried Moshe Rabbeinu, because he knew that people would worship his grave. They would go to his grave and start praying to him instead of to Hashem. He says, this Moshe Rabbeinu, Kodesh Kodashim, sacrificed his entire life for me. I'm not going to let people ruin it. So even that he didn't let the world see where he buried Moshe Rabbeinu. But the rest of the Chachamim, for the most part, we know where they're buried, we know where they are. Going to the graves, by default, according to the Rambam, you shouldn't do. There is another dot, there's another opinion that there is something good that can come out of it. If you know how to do it the right way, meaning you're praying to Hashem at the grave, not praying to the Tzaddik, not praying to the Tzaddik, not praying to the person that died, praying to Hashem. The problem is that people sometimes fall in love with their rabbi so much that they turn him into an idol. I saw this today. This was an announcement. It needs to be said because people need to understand that there's a problem. Apparently, they announced in Chabad at 770 in New York, they put a public announcement on Sunday, April 29th. The 15th of Iyar, and they said tomorrow the Melech Mashiach, the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is not going to be able to accept the congregation that comes to visit him every day because he doesn't feel well. So he's not going to accept any people that are visiting, any of the visitors, but he will be at the events the following day for the bar mitzvot and the weddings and all the other events. He'll be there. Oh, by then he should feel better. The Rebbe died almost 30 years ago, 20-something years ago. He's not alive. He died. Everyone knows this. But apparently, they fell in love with the Rebbe to such an extent that forget about the fact that they said that he's a Mashiach was already a problem to begin with. But to say he's still alive and he's not going to accept people because he doesn't feel well, this is a new level of crazy, Rabotai. This is something wrong in the water. I understand people love him. I understand he was a tzaddik. But why are you perverting his Torah? Why are you perverting Hashem Yitbarach's Torah? This is chilul Hashem. This is the definition of chilul Hashem. The goyim are looking at us and they're saying, how is this different than J.C. Penney? We said he died and he came back. You're saying he died, didn't come back, came back. Sometimes he's back, sometimes he doesn't feel well. Like, how is this different from Christianity? The Chilonim, the secular Jews are looking at this like, you want me to be religious like these people? Even I know without the Torah that he's not there. This is chilul Hashem. Now, Baruch Hashem, this was publicized by who? By Chabadnik. That is an Ish Emet, that's a real Chabadnik. According to the Torah, definition of Chassidut, it means that you're doing above and beyond halacha, above and beyond the law. Now, these are not obligations, this is extra. You want to do extra? Good for you. You don't want to do extra? It's fine. Point being, that's Chassidut. Chassidut is above and beyond the law. And of course, it means working on your midot. if Hashem says, don't be angry to the average person, that means that you not only are not angry, you're happy. Meaning you're going from the complete opposite extent. You're an extremist, but to the good. If Hashem says be generous, you're overly generous. You're above and beyond. You mesiut nefesh. You sacrifice yourself. Just because somebody says he's Chabad, doesn't mean he's Chabad. If he is one of these people, I don't care if he has the Rebbe's face tattooed to his forehead. It does not make them Chabad. Chabad is a Chassidut that worries about Kvod Hashem. That worries about the honor of Hashem. The honor of Hashem means the honor of the Torah, following the Torah, not following some person, even if the person is a tzaddik. You don't desecrate Hashem's name to honor a person. Be'ezrat Hashem will now continue with the key part of what we're here to do, which is to learn Torah. Be'ezrat Hashem. We have here in the exile, we have Parashat Emor. Parashat Emor is full of kedusha, full of Torah. It goes from one end to the other, and of course, b'siyata dishmaya, we would like to connect the two ends. The parasha starts talking about the issues of the Kohanim, how they have restrictions of who they can be with. They're not like regular people that can simply marry a kosher Jew, but rather they have to marry a specific type of Jewish woman. But aside from that, we have at the end of the parasha the very famous story of the blasphemer. And of course, we always know from Chazal that everything that is next to each other, there is a specific reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu decreed for it to be that way, because the Torah doesn't have everything in order. You know, many times when people first start learning Torah, they tend to get confused because they say, wait a minute, how can this happen if this already happened? Or how could that happen if that didn't happen? The Torah is not in order. When you are talking about the parashot itself, they're not in the order of time of when certain things happen. There are certain things that are written early in the Torah that actually happen later on, and vice versa. Certain things that are mentioned later on in the Torah that are mentioned early on. Like, for example, the story of the blasphemer is something that you see in this week's parasha. But then, if you fast forward and you go to Sefer Bamidbar, you'll actually see that there is a second part of the story of another sinner, the Mikoshesh Etzim, the wood gatherer. This all happened at the same time, one after another, and the reason why it's mentioned is because there is enough kamina. There is an actual reason of why this is mentioned here, and there's a question in regards to what the connection is to the wood gatherer, which Be'ezrat Hashem we may get to later on tonight. So anyway, the question is here, why are the Kohanim obligated to marry only a specific type of person? Where you see that a Jew is obviously supposed to marry another Jew. If a Jew marries a non-Jew, they lose their share of the world to come. Today I saw that there was a headline of an article. I didn't waste my time to actually read the whole article, just the first few lines. And there is a shock and awe in the conservative movement, they still call themselves Jewish, conservative movement of rabbis within the conservative movement defying the conservative rules. Of what? What rules? I mean, they still actually have rules. What rules are they're violating? They're violating the rules by now. They're allowing to marry Jews with Gentiles. Just like the Reform have been doing for many, many years since their inception. The conservative always distinguished themselves from the Reform, even though they're both heretics, even though they both violate Shabbat, even though they both have gone down the tubes throughout the generations, especially in the last 50 years, where the head of the conservative movement in Yerushalayim is openly homosexual. But they had one thing, one leg to stand on, where they said, at least we don't marry the Jews and the Gentiles. Well, that's no more. Now they're officially marrying Jews and Gentiles, and a few of the leaders within the conservative movement, one noticeably made from Las Vegas, said, wait, if we marry Jews and Gentiles, then there's no difference between us and the Reform. There was never really a difference between you and the Reform. There was never really a difference between you and an idol worshiper, because you are distorting the Torah and changing it to your likings. And it's not a surprise for anyone that's looking from the right perspective. But needless to say, you have a world where the Jews are marrying Gentiles without necessarily thinking twice about it. No different than what happened at the time of Germany. Anyone that has read a little bit of history about Am Yisrael, some of the books about what transpired before the Holocaust. Many people have spent time looking at what happened during the Holocaust, but there was also Am Yisrael before the Holocaust. And you see how the great sages of Am Yisrael screamed foul and tried to warn Am Yisrael of what's going to come if they continue sinning. No different than what the prophets, Jeremiah and Yechezkel and Zechariah and the rest of the prophets did, and Isaiah, screaming and trying to tell people to wake up and stop sinning, stop going against Hashem, stop intermarrying. In Germany, it got so ugly that Jews were not only marrying Gentiles, but they were openly making it a thing to do to convert to Christianity itself. Literally, the intermarriage was through the roof. The only other time where intermarriage was ever worse in history is today, the day that we're living in, Hashem Yishmor. As we get closer and closer to Mashiach, we get closer and closer to the 50th gate of Tumah, as the Or HaChaim HaKadosh said in Parashat Shmot. Now, the problem with this whole intermarriage situation is that simply, when a Jew marries a Gentile, if a Jewish man marries a Jewish woman, his kids are not Jewish. And if a Jewish woman marries a non-Jewish man, her kids are still Jewish, halachically speaking, but of course, it's very unlikely that they're going to live Jewish life, since their own parent did not live a Jewish life. And many times this leads to many problems. There was lots of corruption done before the Holocaust by the Zionists, that were anti-religious, anti-Torah, but when it served them right, all of a sudden they would do things. One example that I recently read in the book The Transfer, that talks about some of the corruption by the Zionists before the Holocaust to steal money from Am Yisrael, to work together with the Nazis in order to line their pockets, is simply when they had one very successful businessman, Melchin, wanting to join their board, they found that there was one flaw. He was a leader, he was powerful, he had all of the great ideas, but there was one problem. He wasn't Jewish. He wasn't Jewish, but he was an avid Zionist. Why? Because his father was Jewish, but his mom was not Jewish. So you can't have this guy join a Jewish organization if he's not Jewish. So what do? They converted him. Now you would think, oh, this is great. Why is that a bad thing? Because it was a fake conversion. Because the guy was documented as still a member of the church, literally less than a month before they converted him. So the reality is that when it comes to Judaism, a person has to understand is that if you want to lie, you're only lying to yourself. You're only lying to yourself. There is no lying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is no showing up to Shamayim and say, I tried. There's no such thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu already knows every single thing you've ever done and every single thing you've ever thought of and every intention you had behind it. And when a person tries to fool Hashem, they get an additional punishment for it. So now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very specific with Am Yisrael not marrying the Gentiles. There's literally, in the last several parashot, constant mention of how we have to stay away from the Gentiles, never marry them, never behave like them. And there's a constant mention for Am Yisrael to distinguish themselves from the Gentiles, not to wear the same clothes, so much so that if a Jew marries a Gentile, they lose their olam haba. They go to Gehenom. They suffer tremendously in kafakela. There's all types of punishment that they get. That a person, if they only knew what damage they're going to get, what kind of severe punishment they're going to get for even being intimate with a non-Jew. One time in their life, literally they would cry tears of blood. But of course, most people are ignorant and they run away from the truth in every chance that they get, and they have a lot of so-called rabbis that support their heretical behavior, as long as the check continues to clear for their donations. And unfortunately, this is one of the things that the prophet Jeremiah cried about, when all types of false prophets would try to give people the news they wanted to hear, the good news, where this prophet, fake prophet it ends up being, says to everyone, stop listening to Jeremiah, he's full of negativity, full of warnings, don't worry, God talked to me, and in 2 years, Nebuchadnezzar, he's going down, and Hashem is going to rebuild the Bet HaMikdash. And he did this after publicly embarrassing Jeremiah. Jeremiah spoke to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I never spoke to this guy, he's a liar. Tell Am Yisrael that because of him, they're going to get an additional punishment. They're going to get an additional punishment because they believed him. And him, as a liar, he's going to die this year. Jeremiah comes back to Am Yisrael and tells him, this is exactly what happens. This is Jeremiah, I believe, chapter 28. Just learned it today with Rabbi Ephraim, went through some of the details, B'siyata Dishmaya, and this prophet is told in front of everyone, because you are a liar, you're going to die this year. And if you look at the dates of when everything happened, literally within 2 months, this guy died. This guy died, and of course his prophecy of good news never transpired. Now one would ask, why? Why is it such a bad thing? Even if you're lying, like Friedman, Manis Friedman's son told me. So what if he's lying a little bit? What do you care? Look at the results. So why would giving people false hope be such a bad thing? Because giving people false hope is changing the Torah. Giving people false hope is against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's signature is emet. Now, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us bad news, he's telling us if we do bad things would happen. It's not because he wants us to be scared because there's some type of good coming out of his personal joy of us being scared. It's when the prophets that he sends to tell people the truth are out there, and they're warning people of all types of damage that will happen to them if they continue with the bad behavior going against the Torah. It's not because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is happy that these prophets are scaring people. Rather, he's happy because they're warning them, because now that certain people are warned, they now are going to have a legitimate chance to make an educated decision to change their ways. It's not a scare tactic, but rather a warning. And a warning is something that all of us need, all of us depend on. You have warnings in traffic, you have warnings on medicine bottles, you have warnings on food. All of us require warnings. But unfortunately today, the warnings have turned into scare tactics, and people run away from them, especially when they have fakers telling them to run away from fear of Hashem. Now, of course, we have a Kadosh Baruch Hu that tells us it's extremely important for a Jew to marry a non-Jew, and also to separate themselves from the non-Jews. Separate themselves as much as possible. Surely you can do business with them. Surely you can, be cordial and friendly. But when it comes to befriending them to such a close point where your kids and their kids are playing together on a regular basis, they're invited to your house on a regular basis to eat dinner and so on, there lies the problem. Why? Because if you make it normal for your kids to see non-Jews in your house, that they could be, hang out at all times, and this non-Jew is not intending on converting. This is simply a non-Jew that believes in Yeshua Imach Shimo, lives in Muhammad, or even if he believes in God, simply he's just a decent person, and you want to be a friend with him, and you want his kids to play with your kids because you think it's a good idea. The Gemara in Masechet Avodah Zarah says such a thing is forbidden. Why? Because even though you can decipher the difference between you and him, you can decipher the difference between you and her, your kids are not going to be able to do it. And therefore, they're going to see if they're able to grow up together, then what's the difference between them and a Jew, and end up marrying each other. And unfortunately, this is what happened throughout our history. Anytime we broke the barrier between the Jews and the Gentiles, little by little intermarriage increased. And this is why I told one of my dear students, who was a very, very dear person, a very precious person, that asked me, do you know of any synagogue that will accept righteous Noahites to attend? And I told him, if it's a legitimate synagogue that has fear of the Almighty, they will never accept righteous Noahites to attend on a regular basis. And quite frankly, even once in a while is probably unlikely. Why? Because there has to be a separation where even if you are a righteous Noahide, we have to make sure that Am Yisrael does not think that they're allowed to marry you because you're a righteous Noahide and you know a lot of Torah, even more than the people in the community. Still, we're not allowed to marry you. Now, needless to say, this is not a prejudice against non-Jews. There's also limitations within the Jewish community itself, where certain people are not allowed to marry certain people. One of the prime examples that a lot of people have a tough time with until they learn the details of what Yirat Shamayim is, what fear of the Almighty is, who's really running the world, is the details of the Kohen. The Kohen is not allowed to marry certain people. Not allowed to marry certain people. Now, of course, if it's the Kohen Gadol, he even has more limitations than that. Even more limitations than that. But a regular Kohen is not allowed to marry just anybody. He has to be very, very specific. He's not allowed to marry a woman that has been divorced. He's not allowed to marry a woman that is a harlot. Now, the question is, how many people out there are harlots? Now, if you that are looking for a shidduch to go marry a Kohen, that's because the definition that people think of when they think of a harlot, they think of a prostitute, they think of just some woman who's in the streets, some escort, some woman that's full of filth, full of garbage, that even at the time of the Bet HaMikdash, there's a mitzvah that forbids us from accepting the sacrifice from this harlot. Why? Because if the halacha says, Rambam explains it also, that if you allow this harlot to take money out of her income that she makes from her promiscuity and her filth, you allow her to donate that money to the Bet HaMikdash, you're enabling her to continue her crime. Why? Because she has our conscience is telling her, listen, you can't be a harlot and go to heaven. You're a bad person. You're doing bad things. But then the Yetzer Hara says to her, what bad things? What are you talking about? They ended up building a whole yeshiva because of the tzedakah that she's giving. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, not allowed to take her money. Let her live with that bad conscience. Let her live with the fact that she is a sinner and not think for a moment that she's allowed to sin because she's using the money for good. No such thing. The same applies for all other unethical businesses, whether it's the cash advance business, or you're stealing money from selling cars, or you're stealing money from selling computers, or you're stealing money from selling stocks. Whatever it is, if you're an unethical person, you're taking advantage of people, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want your tzedakah. You're a mechalel Shabbat, you're going against the Torah, and you think you're going to save yourself by donating a lot of money while continuing to sin, you have to understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to throw that money in your face. He has no interest whatsoever in people thinking even for a moment that they can continue sinning and just resolve everything by giving some tzedakah. That's only something you'll find in Christianity and Catholicism. You're not going to find that in Judaism. Unfortunately, you will find Jews that call themselves rabbis that will actually enable people to continue sinning so long as they give tzedakah. When the guy comes to them in a car on Shabbat, and they don't say a single thing. Why? Because they know that his check always clears, and it's usually 4 digits or more. So this is literally spiritual murder. This is spiritual murder of the nation, because our Torah clearly tells us that we have to rebuke our people, we have to help them, we have to love them. And how can you love somebody by taking his money without helping him actually go to heaven by telling him to keep Shabbat and the rest of the mitzvot? So now we have a situation here where the language barrier, as far as the difference between Hebrew and English, is really the reason why people don't truly understand the meaning of this verse, where it says that the Kohen shall not marry a woman who is a harlot or has been desecrated or a woman that's been divorced. So most people think, okay, divorce we can understand, desecrated we can understand. Well, harlot? I mean, were there that many harlots? I mean, one of the reasons why Kadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Egypt is because the women were so modest, and because the women did not fornicate with the Gentiles, with the exception of one case that's mentioned in this week's parasha, Shlomit, that was raped by the Egyptian. There was no such relation between the Jews and the Gentiles, and Hashem specifically coordinated it in such a fashion that the Gentiles, the Egyptians, literally were disgusted by the Jews. They were disgusted by us, and specifically it's mentioned at the time of Yosef HaTzadik. So this helped us stay away from them. But unfortunately, that beautiful blessing did not last, because throughout all of the generations, since the time we left Egypt, the Gentiles were constantly looking to marry the Jews, and unfortunately the Jews constantly had a Yetzirah to marry the Gentiles, against the Torah in both cases, both for the Gentiles and for the Jews. And if they stay that way, they both lose their eternity. The Gentile loses his eternity and or her eternity, and the Jew loses their eternity. It's a horrific punishment you get for such relations. Now you have a situation here where Torah says that the Kohen wants to marry a Jew, not a Gentile. It has nothing to do with a Gentile. Wants to marry a Jew, but she's a harlot. Why? What's the problem? No. This is not talking about some prostitute or some escort. This is talking about a woman that was with anybody else that was forbidden to her. She's considered a harlot, meaning if this woman, she's a righteous woman today, she did tshuva, she has kisui rosh even without being married, the dress reaches her ankles, she covers everything, tzaddikah, she reads Tehillim every day, finishes the whole book every day, she's a tzaddikah kdosha. But one time she was intimate with a non-Jew, she was intimate with Mustafa, she was intimate with Chris. One time, the Kohen is not allowed to marry her. The Kohen is not allowed to marry her. Rashi says that a woman that's a harlot, according to our Torah, what's a harlot? It's a woman that has lived with any man who is not permitted to her because of a negative commandment. And this includes not only relationships punishable by death or karet, also living with a mamzer or a non-Jew. Meaning that even if she had a boyfriend, you have a very serious problem. Very serious problem. Why? Because if your shidduch is a Kohen, you're not allowed to marry him. I had a case like this one time, a wonderful woman that she was looking to get married. She found Mr. Perfect, but Mr. Perfect was the most imperfect. Why? He was a Kohen, and since she was a Ba'alat Tshuva, I told her, you're not allowed to marry him. Of course, there was a lot of tears, but the truth is the truth. Now, many times people think that they could, just do this and do that and try to beat the system in some way or another. All they're doing is that they're beating themselves, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu then has to take care of it, and typically the damage is much more severe than just a few words that cause you to cry. So now, the important thing is that this is mentioned multiple times in the Torah, that the Kohanim cannot just marry anybody. They have to marry specific types of people. They're also not allowed to marry converts. Many new converts get offended by this. But it's important for you to know that for the same reason why you converted is the same reason of why HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to the Kohen that he's not allowed to marry you if you're a convert. What's the reason? The reason is that it says in chapter 21, verse 7, for each one is holy to his God, you shall sanctify him, for he offers the food of your God. He shall remain holy to you, for holy am I, Hashem, who sanctifies you. In so many words, and again he says it again in verse 15, for I am Hashem who sanctifies you. In so many words, what logic does it have to not allow the Kohen to marry a woman that he thinks he loves? The logic is, I am Hashem. That's the logic. I said so. That's why. That's why. Hashem doesn't have anything against the woman per se. She's a Ba'alat Tshuva, she's a Tzaddikah, but she's still forbidden to that Kohen. She's a convert, righteous convert. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is her father and her mother. He loves her dearly. And we are obligated to love her more than we love natural-born Jews. Yet, she's forbidden to marry a Kohen. Why? I am Hashem. That's the reason. I am Hashem. That's Hashem says, I am Hashem. That's the reason. Now you can say, yeah, but it's because of this, because of that. Bottom line is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I am Hashem. That's it. That's the reason. I decide Kohen is not allowed to marry any of these people. But they are allowed to marry others. Why? Because there is an order in his system that is beyond our comprehension. There are certain souls that are designated for certain souls. If they match, they can bring an extraordinary amount of holiness to the world. If they match with the wrong soul, they can bring an extraordinary amount of impurity to the world. An extraordinary amount of pain to the world. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a much better system than we imagine, and he knows what's best much more than what we do. Now, of course, some people don't necessarily like the system, so they say, yeah, but maybe that's relevant to the past, it's not necessarily relevant to today, and that's why you have the conservative, the reform, and unfortunately others that are even promoting intermarriage. Promoting intermarriage, promoting the Judeo-Christian relations to be stronger, and all types of other things like this, even though Torah forbids such things. Forbids it. Now, of course, a person needs to know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at the end of the parasha, tells us a story of what happened. Happened that there was a woman that also wanted to beat the system in a little bit. Wanted to beat the system. What's the system? She wanted to be friendly, even though she's a slave in Egypt. It's horrible. They're killing babies. They're killing adults. There's an extraordinary amount of death everywhere, damage everywhere. People are missing limbs. People are missing eyes. People are suffering. And we are also not the only slaves. There are other nations there that are slaves too. And so there's an enormous amount of disaster. It's literally a much, much bigger Holocaust than the one that we have in our history books that happened 70 years ago approximately, that murdered 6 million Jews and millions of other non-Jews. What happened in Egypt was much, much worse. To be happy was literally impossible. But this young woman named Shlomit, she wants to be happy. How does she express her happiness? Hello, 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 hi, shalom, Shlomit, because she wants to say shalom to everybody, not just to her husband, not just to her kids. She wants to say hello to the neighbor. She wants to say hello to the other neighbor. She wants to say hello to the Egyptian that beat her and her husband. She wants to say hello to the Egyptian that may end up beating them later on. She wants to say hello to the Egyptian that just killed a few kids. She wants to say hello to everybody. Maybe because if I'm nice to them, maybe things will change. Who said that you're allowed to do such a thing? Who said that you're supposed to have platonic relationships with some guy? Who said that you're allowed to have a guy friend? Who said you're allowed to do such things? What? We're not. I know him. He's like my brother. Well, according to the Torah, he's actually forbidden to you just like your brother, because you're not married. So in regards to that, yeah, he is like your brother. Your brother's forbidden to you, and this guy's forbidden to you. At least with your brother, you're allowed to talk to, but this guy you're not allowed to talk to. So he's actually even worse than your brother. But unfortunately, people want to change the Torah. They want to custom make it. And Shlomit was one of those women. And what ended up happening is that one of those hellos landed on an Egyptian. The Egyptian said, oh, hello. You know what? Hello back. And he ends up raping her. And out of that rape comes this blasphemer. This blasphemer that the Chachamim, the Mekubalim, Arizal, say this blasphemer is actually the Gilgul of Cain. The Gilgul of Cain, the reincarnation of Cain, was split into multiple places. One was the Egyptian, one was Korach, one was this blasphemer. This would have to be another reincarnation, as I've mentioned in my shiur about Kabbalah and the discussing Christianity or Yeshua Imach Shemo, this blasphemer gets reincarnated again into Yeshua Nutzli, Imach Shemo v'zichro, the Jew that ended up bringing more death to Jewish people in the last 2,000 years than anyone else in history, and literally being the source of all tumah. Anyone that reads a little bit about some of the things that happen in the other side, the things regarding to dibukim and so on, many times you see that the place of tum'ah are constantly enticed or energized by Christianity, by the idolatry from Christianity. Literally, the Mekubalim say that the source, the leader of, or general, I would even say, in the place of tum'ah in the world is Yoshke, is the tum'ah that he created into the world. So this already started from the creation of the world. One part of the story is this blasphemer. But the blasphemer wasn't just given as a son to anybody. You're not going to see this blasphemer, be a son to any of the tzaddikim. You see this one going for a woman that broke the fence. She didn't go and look for a Egyptian to marry. She simply wanted to say hello. She broke the fence. HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed her that there's a measure for measure. You broke the fence. What you're going to bring to the world is someone else that breaks the fence. Someone else that broke the fence. And what ends up happening is that since this child came out of a Gentile father, that meant that he had no tribe. He had no tribe. He wanted to go join the tribe of Dan because that's where his mother was from. But the tribe of Dan says, "I'm sorry, you can't join us because the tribe is decided based on the father, and your father is a Egyptian, so you have no tribe." He said, "No, we have to go to Bet Din. Let's go to Moshe Rabbeinu." They brought the case to the Bet Din of Moshe Rabbeinu. It doesn't get better than that. A person that speaks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu like one friend speaks to another. Meaning there is no wrong answer here. There is no, maybe he made a mistake. Maybe he doesn't understand my case. Maybe I didn't this, maybe I didn't that. You're going to Moshe Rabbeinu simply. It's literally speaking face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's chavruta. So the Bet Din of Moshe Rabbeinu looks at the case of this blasphemer and the tribe of Dan, the leaders of the tribe of Dan, and paskins that the tribe of Dan are correct. This young boy does not have any permission whatsoever to think that he's part of the tribe of Dan. Why? His father's not Jewish. After this boy hears what happened, he gets angry and he curses HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. He actually mentions the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he curses it. After that, he gets arrested, and Moshe Rabbeinu asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what do we do with him? Now, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu knows that anyone that's a blasphemer, that curses the name of Hashem, it's a death penalty. So what's the question? Why does Moshe Rabbeinu ask what to do with him? Simple. We have another guy named Slofchad that was gathering wood on Shabbat that also has to get the death penalty for violating Shabbat. So the question is not if we're going to kill this blasphemer or not. Question is, are we going to put both of them in the same cell or in two different cells? Because if they're in the same cell, then surely this blasphemer is going to think he's going to get the same exact death penalty as the Mechalel Shabbat, which is the worst type. But since his penalty is less, technically he should be in a different cell, so he doesn't suffer extra, meaning even he's going to die anyway, but at least he'll know that his death penalty is not going to be as bad as the Mechalel Shabbat, as the one that desecrated Shabbat. That's in essence the question that Moshe Rabbeinu asked the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So here we see, Rabotai, that we have on one end of the parasha, we're talking about the holiness of the Kohanim and how they have to be very specific about who they pick to marry. They can't just marry any righteous girl. They have to understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one that runs the world. He has a system. We have to follow along. And the better we follow along, the better we can produce good in the world. But when a person steers away and starts interpreting things on their own. As soon as HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends them a rebuke by telling them that the deen is not for you, the deen is against you, their ego could easily get in the way, and they could end up cursing God. They could end up violating Shabbat. They could end up going against the Kadosh Baruch Hu in so many different ways and end up losing their Olam Haba. Instead of losing a small battle and winning the war, they end up losing everything. Why? Because they tried to break the fence. They tried to recreate Judaism. There's another example of this in the Gemara. The Gemara in Masechet Yevamot. The Mishnah there, page 61a, the Mishnah there says that if a Kohen performed the Irusin with a widow and was then appointed to be a Kohen Gadol before consummating the marriage, he may marry her. Here we see that there is an exception to the rule. Exception to the rule, where if this Kohen was performed the Irusin with a widow before he became Kohen Gadol, he didn't know he's going to become Kohen Gadol, and they already performed the Irusin. This is like the engagement, not to really be compared to today's engagement, but he's a regular Kohen, and a regular Kohen is allowed to marry a widow. But now a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a widow. Not allowed to marry a widow. So he, as a regular Kohen, he got engaged to a widow. But after they got engaged, which in today's world, it's in essence the same thing as the actual marriage itself. If you compare the two, it's not like the engagement of today, which is a complete waste of time and money. So here, now he get engaged. The only thing they haven't done is the actual act itself to finalize everything. And he finds out, they announce, hello, we have good news. You are officially the Kohen Gadol. Now we have a problem. What's the problem? Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry the girl that I have a Kiddushin with. What do I do? Mishnah says, no, he's allowed to marry her. He's allowed to marry her. He can stay, because they already started beforehand, he's allowed to continue with it. And then the Mishnah continues and tells a story happened with Yeshua Ben Gamla, that he married Marta, the daughter of Baitus, and when she was a widow. And afterwards, the king appointed him to be Kohen Gadol, and he married her all the same. Meaning this story happened, this type of thing happened. This is not a theoretical thing. That this Kohen named Yeshua Ben Gamla married a widow, and later her father, which was the king, made him into a the king made him into a not her father. The king made him into a into Kohen Gadol. Now who is this? Who is this? Yeshua Ben Gamla. Yeshua Ben Gamla, in the Gemara Masechet Baba Batra, page 21a, says, in the name of Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav, says, that man, Yeshua Ben Gamla, is to be remembered in a favorable way. For were it not for him, the Torah would have been forgotten by Am Yisrael. Here you have an extraordinary description of Yeshua Ben Gamla, that if it was not for him, that the Torah would have been forgotten, chas v'shalom. How could it be? It says because originally the system was that if a child had a father, the father would teach this child the Torah. And one that didn't have a father would not learn Torah. But then the sages enacted that teachers of children should be installed in Yerushalayim, so that any youth would go there and be taught Torah. And despite this, if a child had a father, the father would take him to Yerushalayim and he would learn Torah, but it didn't solve the problem, because whoever didn't have a father, there would be nobody to take him to Yerushalayim to study Torah. So then the sages fixed it again and said, okay, local authorities should be installed and they should open yeshivot in every place. And they should bring the kids, 16 years, 17 years, who lacked the education, to these yeshivot to be taught by the teachers. But there was still one problem left. What was the problem? Any student that became upset with his teacher because his teacher got angry with him, the student will rebel against the teacher and end up leaving. Why? Because he's 16, 17 years old. He already lived a life. He thinks he knows everything. You're installing him into some yeshiva. The rabbi tells him to be quiet until he finishes what the chidush is. This kid doesn't want to hear it. The rabbi rebukes him. He says, what? Talk to me that way? I'm leaving. So now, even though you solved the problem of bringing the yeshivot to every town, even if somebody doesn't have a father, he still has a way to learn Torah, you still have a problem. The problem is that all the guys that are coming into the yeshiva, they're, teenagers, and they end up leaving because they don't want anyone to tell them what to do. And this matter was not resolved until Yeshua Ben Gamla came and enacted that the local authorities, meaning the rabbis, the sages, should install teachers of children in every district in town. And they should bring the children starting at the age of 6 and 7 years old to be taught by these teachers. And with this new ordinance, Yeshua Ben Gamla ensured that the Torah would not be forgotten by Israel. Why? Because if you bring a 6-year-old to the yeshiva, that 6-year-old, even though he's a little troublemaker, wants to climb the walls, wants to play, wants to this, if you speak to him a certain way, you rebuke him a certain way, you do this, eventually you get this kid to start learning, and you have this kid by the time he is 15, 16 years old, he's already a Ben Torah. Why? Because he hasn't been damaged for 15 years. He's still relatively new in the box. And who is this thanks to? Thanks to Yeshua Ben Gamla. So you would think that Yeshua Ben Gamla is the greatest, according to this. But if we go back to our Mishnah in Masechet Yevamot, we have a little bit of a problem. Why? Because Yeshua Ben Gamla, who married this girl, the Smarta Bat Baitus, is not spoken about in a favorable way. Why? The Gemara says that the king appointed Yeshua Ben Gamla to be Kohen. But the Sanhedrin did not. Rav Yosef says, Ketir kahazina acha, kesher shel reshaim ani roe pan. I see here, there's a conspiracy, there is a connection to wicked people in this whole election of becoming a Kohen Gadol. Meaning that although Yeshua Ben Gamla did some good things, his position of being Kohen Gadol, it's only because of a conspiracy connection to wicked people. How could you say such a thing? Because he married this girl, he married this widow, this Marta Bat Baitus. And who is this Marta Bat Baitus? The Gemara in Masechet Baba Batra, page 21a, says that this Marta Bat Baitus, Gemara Masechet Gitin, page 56a, says this Marta Bat Baitus was a daughter of a wealthy man, and she ended up being the wealthiest woman in Yerushalayim. And therefore she wanted to make her new husband happy, Yeshua Ben Gamla. So what did she do? She paid off to buy the keuna. Now if he's so righteous, what's the problem? The Gemara asks this. He did great things. He made sure that Am Yisrael does not forget Torah. He made sure that there's little yeshivot in every town. The kids learn Torah. Yes, as righteous as he was, we have a system. And the system is somebody else was supposed to be the Kohen Gadol, somebody that was greater than him. And there was somebody greater than him, but that could not happen. Why? Because despite his righteousness, there was a mistake made where they wanted to beat the system. And beating the system put a stain on his spiritual portfolio that forevermore we read this Gemara. It talks about that the only reason he became a Kohen Gadol was because of a conspiracy and a connection to wicked people, referring to his wife and all of the other co-conspirators that love money. So here we see that someone that starts off with naive intentions like Shlomit ends up bringing terrible things to themselves and also to their kids. The kid follows the same line of thinking that, okay, but it's not my fault that my mom got raped. I still want to join the tribe. Yes, we understand you want it, but that's just not the way it works. There are rules, and the rules are you can't be part of the name of the tribe of Dan. He gets angry because they won't allow him to change the rules. They won't allow him to change the Torah. He curses God and loses everything. But we also see someone that was considered righteous also have a stain on his name. A Kohen Gadol that was really not supposed to be a Kohen Gadol. He only became it because you changed the system. So now, Rabotai, we have these types of things happening every single day in society where people want to change what has been the norm. Whether it's the fashion of today, Hashem Yishmo, that is literally the one of the worst tragedies that ever happened to mankind, or it's the education they give children today. There are endless ways endless things you can cry about. But we've already cried about those. There is one thing that we learned with Rabbi Ephraim, Baruch Hashem, that we're going to cry a little more about. And the reason why is because we believe that this poses a great danger to Am Yisrael that is, unlike the other dangers, is simply not being addressed. Meaning that if you're talking about the danger of immodesty, surely there are rabbis and communities that are fighting the Yetzirah of immodesty. If you're talking about the issues of immorality, pornography, non-kosher food, corruption within certain businesses, surely there are some people out there that are fighting it. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's others, sometimes others. But when it comes to the CHABAD MaShiach Now movement, rarely do you see anyone speaking against it. And if they do, typically it's on the low. It's not going to be a public statement because nobody wants a war, either because of the good that Chabad has done or does, or both, or simply because they're a conglomerate that no one wants to mess with, because the second you mention their name, they torture your life as much as they could possibly can. Whether it's simply annoying you 24 hours a day with messages, threats, curses, all types of other wonderful things, Baruch Hashem. But since we work for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to remind ourselves at all times that if there is something that needs to be taught, we are the first to do it. And Baruch Hashem, we've already discussed this issue multiple times, but since then, a new chidush has come up. Many of the Chabadniks that have sent me messages different shluchim that are all over the place that have heard the shiur, that have heard the video where I say that this whole concept of Mashiach Now is not something that the sages taught. It's not something that agrees with our Masoret. It's not something that even agrees with logic with anyone that knows Torah. But unfortunately, one after another disagrees with it for different reasons. Now we have a chidush that actually shows that this, not only the sages did not teach it, but rather the Torah is against Mashiach Now. In fact, Mashiach Now is against the Torah. Now, to believe that Mashiach is going to come and can come on any given day is an obligation every Jew has. A Jew that does not believe that the Mashiach can come on any given day is going against the Torah and is considered a heretic. So here we're not saying not to believe that Mashiach can come, but rather to make the primary focus of your Judaism, the primary focus of your life, to constantly put flags and stickers everywhere and tell everybody Mashiach Now, while the vast majority of people don't even understand what halachot Shabbat are, don't even understand what will happen to them if Mashiach actually did come tomorrow, as they would be the first to be destroyed. As the prophet says, "V'ruach piv yamit rasha," that just with his lips he will destroy all of the wicked. A wicked person is not necessarily just a murderer. A wicked person is a mechalel Shabbat. A wicked person is someone that's married to a Gentile. A wicked person is someone that weighs seed and acts immorally. In so many words, a wicked person is the vast majority of the world. This is the reason why we have in our Torah, "Uba leTzion goel leshaveh pesha beYaakov," that the Mashiach is going to come, the Goel is going to come to save all of those people that used to be pushim, that used to be wicked, used to be criminals. Meaning, he's coming to save all of the people that have done tshuva. But if a person has not done tshuva by the time Mashiach comes, he's done. He is going to pay a very heavy fine, to say the least. A fine that will cost him everything. If he is not keeping Shabbat by the time Mashiach comes, he's gone forever. He's destroyed forever. You have to go into Gehenom. If he is still married to a non-Jew and Mashiach comes, he lost his share of the world to come. He's not going to enjoy Mashiach Now. And this is actually something that the sages discuss. Where? The Gemara in Masechet Yevamot, page 62a. This section of the Gemara talks about the mitzvah of pru'ubu, the mitzvah of procreation, bringing children to the world. And there's a machloket between two of the sages, Rabbi Yochanan Ravuna. And it starts off saying that Ravuna says that if a man had children, but they died in his lifetime, Ravuna says that despite that, if he had children, even if they died, nevertheless he has fulfilled the mitzvah of pru'ubu, of procreation, and he's not obligated to have additional children. Is one of the mitzvot in the Torah, and we get in the book of in Genesis, that a Jew has to bring children to the world, specifically one boy, one girl, or more. Now, what if somebody brings those kids and Hashem Yishmo, during his lifetime those kids die? Ravuna says it's not his fault. He still fulfilled the mitzvah. Fulfilled the mitzvah. Rav Yochanan says, no, he didn't. He did not fulfill the mitzvah. He is required to have more children to replace the ones that died. And there starts the machloket. Ravuna says he fulfilled the mitzvah. It's not his fault that two kids died. Rav Yochanan says, no, if they died, he has to go and have more kids. So then the Ravuna says, what's the source what's his argument? He says he fulfilled the mitzvah of procreation of pru'ubu based on the fact that Rav Asi says that the son of David, meaning the Mashiach, will not arrive until all of the souls are vacated from Guf. As we learn from the pasuk in Isaiah chapter 57, verse 16, that says, "For a spirit of redemption from before me shall be late born, and the souls I have made." So here, Rav Asi is saying that there's a place called Guf that is a chamber in heaven that separates the Shekhinah and the angels. And this specific place called Guf is contains all of the souls that were created during the first 6 days of creation. And in order for the Mashiach to come, all of those souls have to come out of this place. And therefore, the argument that what the teachings of Rav Asi is that once all of those neshamot, once all of those souls are out of this place, Guf, Mashiach eventually is going to come. Now, it may happen much later after all of the souls are already out for a while. It may happen right after they're done. He's not specifying a specific time, but he's saying that in order for the Mashiach to come, there is a requirement that that place, Guf, has to be empty. No more souls. Rav Huna, on the other hand, is using this specific source from Rav Asi and saying that, look, we have here a teachings that in order for the Mashiach to come, this place has to be empty. This place that has all the souls has to be empty. So that means that if this guy is had kids, he is, what does he do? What's the whole purpose that Hashem brought procreation to the world? Is to bring the Mashiach. He brought procreation to the world so we can bring the Mashiach. So if I brought another couple of souls to the world, that means that I've emptied out another couple of souls from this place. So I served my purpose. I fulfilled the mitzvah. That's the argument of Rav Huna. And he's using the source of Rav Asi. Comes Rav Yochanan and says, no, he has not fulfilled the mitzvah of procreation. Why? Because we have a pasuk, we have a teachings. Leshevet etzara be'inyan. That we're required that through this procreation, there will be a fulfillment of God's plan, where He is the one that formed the world in order to be inhabited. And since these children have died, there is no habitation of the world through them. So here, Rav Yochanan is not disagreeing with what Rav Asi said, which is that the Mashiach is not going to come until this place, Guf, is empty. He's not disagreeing with that. He's disagreeing with what Rav Huna is saying, which is that so long as I help empty out this place, and I bring a couple of souls to the world, then I'm fulfilling my obligation in the world to bring Mashiach, and therefore I'm doing good. Rav Yochanan says, no, you're not getting the point. Although what Rav Asi said is true, and it's right, and it's necessary, that's not the purpose of this world. The purpose of this world is to take those neshamot and have them fulfill the plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is to live a life of Torah and mitzvot, to live a life in this world, to habitate this place. Not just to come and die as just somebody that died as a still life baby, Hashem Yishmor, or some type of abortion. No, you have to obviously come to the world and fulfill the will of Hashem. Now, what if somebody had a couple of kids and he's already older, he can't have any more kids? The Gemara says, don't worry. The minute those kids have grandkids, they have kids, meaning you become a grandfather, Even if his kids end up dying before him, he still fulfilled the mitzvah because there's still, those souls are habitating the world, meaning that there's still more Torah in the world, there's more people to fulfill the will of Hashem. And therefore the Chachamim say that the grandchildren are reckoned as children, and if one's children die, or if the son is discovered to be a saris, or the daughter's a saris, meaning that he has a son that is not able to have kids, or a daughter is not able to have kids, then the father has not fulfilled the mitzvah of procreation. But if the son has produced grandkids, then he's fulfilled the mitzvah. Then there is more people that are following the will of Hashem. So in essence, the ultimate difference between the two is that although they're both using the same exact source, same exact fact, that this place goof has to be emptied out before Mashiach comes. But there's no guarantee that the second that the last neshama comes to the world, Mashiach is going to come, or it's going to happen 100 years after it's empty, because that place goof is not the ultimate purpose of the world. That's just simply a condition that needs to be met before Mashiach comes. The purpose of the world, though, is for all of those neshamot that are coming to fulfill the will of Hashem, to habitate the world, to be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to learn Torah, to do mitzvot, and so on. And in so many words, this is the mistake that Chabad is making, where they in essence are taking the entire Torah, the entire mitzvot, everything that is dear to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, all of the commandments, all of the obligations, all of the reward, all of the punishment, and simply minimizing it into a simple condition, that Mashiach now. Instead of publicizing to Am Yisrael to keep Shabbat, to keep Taharat Mishpacha, to have Yirat Shamayim, to fulfill the will of Hashem as He said it, not as you see it, they have turned everything into Mashiach Now, meaning that we have a motto, Mashiach comes, and now all the problems will be solved. And what are they saying? This is saying that the Lubavitcher Rebbe said this. Now, because he was a tzaddik, and we surely have to give him the benefit of the doubt, we surely know, and anyone that has heard any of his speeches, and even if we heard him say, Mashiach Now, you know, based on what he wrote in his books, based on what he learned from the Tanya, based on what you can learn from his books or the Tanya, his message and their message are not the same. They're both saying Mashiach Now, but just like the machloka between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan, it's not the same message. Why? The Bala Tanya, which is the foundation of Chabad, was something that came after the Baal Shem Tov, the foundation of Chassidut, which came as something that is an extraordinary part of Judaism, but surely is based on the same foundation as the rest of Am Yisrael, which is, we have the Torah, the written Torah, the oral Torah. The foundational stone of the entire Torah is the Gemara. That's our oral Torah. We have, of course, we have our written Torah, the 5 books of Moses. There is no difference as far as the foundation for any part of Am Yisrael. All of us use the same exact foundation. Now, if you look at the teachings of the leaders of Chassidut, they all talked about reward and punishment. They all talked about the obligation to learn the Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch, to fulfill the halachot, to learn Musar, to improve yourself, to constantly fear punishment for not fulfilling the will of Hashem and going against Him. We have a book, a kuntres, that Rabbi Ephraim put together about Gehenom teachings based on the leaders of Chassidut, whether it be the Baal Shem Tov, Magid Mimezrich, the Rabbi Elimelech Milizhinsk, the Baal Tanya, Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, and so on and so forth. Meaning that they're not different in any way, shape, or form from the rest of Judaism. They had different teachings that were like seasonings on top of the same foundation. but still the same exact principles, still the same rules in so many words, same everything. If you go to the Tanya, chapter 8, he warns you that if you're going to waste your time speaking about sports, surfing the internet, chatting on Facebook, hey Rabbi, I have a few friends on Facebook, but I don't know if they're really listening to my rebukes. What do you think I should do? I think you should get off of Facebook and go learn Torah. And if you can have friends, bring them to learn Torah with you. And if they're only digital, then simply go find real friends that you could actually learn Torah with. And stop wasting your time in a digital world. Before you know it, people are going to build kollels on metaverse. Stop wasting your time on the internet. Stop chit-chatting and making fake friends on the internet. Go learn Torah. That's your obligation in the world. But people don't really understand until you tell them clearly, multiple times. And therefore the Baal Tanya said it clearly, multiple times throughout the Tanya, starting with chapter 8, which says, simply for an idle conversation, a person is going to have to go to Kafakela. And anyone that read Ruchot Mesaprot and looked at the commentary, what he wrote in chapter 88, literally your skin will fall off from fear of the words that he's saying of what happens in Kafakela. Awful of awfuls. Awful of awfuls. Nightmare of all nightmares. What happens in Kafakela, the destruction that happens to sinners. And the Baal Tanya says that for a simple waste of time conversation, a person goes to this place. We're talking about having, the Rabbi Yehuda says, destroying angels. Well, they're called destroyers. They're called Malacher Chabala. They're destroying angels. These angels spoke to Rabbi Yehuda. They told him that they only have one desire. They don't have a desire to love. Although they procreate, they don't have lust. They don't even have love for their own kids. These specific destroyers, they only have one lust. To hurt the sinners. That's the only thing they want to do. That's their lust. And each person in Kafakela has 3 of them surrounding him, bringing him from judgment to judgment, from court to court. Shem Yishmor, if you heard what happens, these neshamot have different sentences for different parts of the day, where they're literally punished in more severe ways than the worst possible horror films you could ever imagine. Beaten with fire and for several hours straight, and if that's not enough, they're then taken to a specific place to go cut wood in order to make a fire to burn themselves, and the angels watching them. And then they resurrect them and they bring them back to court every day. And the time in Kafakela is the same as the time here. And one woman that committed adultery 100 times got 100 years of Kafakela and gave the details of her punishment to the smallest minor details. You read this, literally, you get scared to death and start crying. And if you don't, you should check your pulse. It talks about people that are regular people, but all of a sudden they have all types of strange thoughts about Christianity, all types of strange thoughts about wanting to become an atheist. Rabbi Yehuda says it's very possible and even likely those people have a dibuk in them. One of these neshamot that's in Kafakela entered them. Horrible of horribles. The Baal Tanya says, for a waste of time conversation, a person goes to Kafakela. In chapter 8, beginning of the book. In chapter 25, he says people waste a lot of time and they don't learn enough Torah. This is the reason why the sages instituted for us to say, I'm sorry for not learning enough Torah 3 times a day in our Amidah. If you look at the Tanya, you see a monumental work that is constantly giving the same exact message as the rest of the sages. Work on yourself, perfect yourself in your servitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and do tshuva now. Now, not tomorrow, now do tshuva. Because the punishment is severe and the obligation is great. The same message we hear from Pirkei Avot. The same message we hear from Rabbi Yosef Karo. The same message we hear from the Rambam. The same message we hear from the prophets. The Baal HaTanya was already saying tshuva now. When the Lubavitcher Rebbe Alav Shalom said Mashiach now, he wasn't veering away from the foundational teachings of Chabad being the Tanya, because surely the Tanya also wrote an entire book of laws of do's and don'ts called the Shulchan Aruch Harav, telling us these are all the things you need to do. You have to wash your hands, you have to eat kosher, you have to do this. Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Baal HaTanya wrote, where perfecting yourself to do tshuva is and serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in the Tanya, but the details of how to do it is Shulchan Aruch Harav, the do's and don'ts. If you do, all the good things that I mentioned are going to happen. If you don't, all the bad things that I mentioned are going to happen. And surely, not a single leader in Chassidut has ever said that only read the Tanya. Surely you have to go read the Gemara. Surely you have to go read the Chumash. Surely you have to read the Rambam. Surely you have to follow everything. Don't just make Judaism into one thing. We have an extraordinary masoret, extraordinary obligation. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Alav Shalom, was not veering away, chas v'shalom, from the foundation. The opposite. He was strengthening the message. By saying Mashiach now, all he was telling you is the same exact thing that the prophets were saying 3,000 years ago. Same message that the Rambam said 900 years ago. Same message that the Baal HaTanya said couple of 100 years ago. Do tshuva now. Why? Because the Mashiach could be arriving now. And if he arrives and you haven't done tshuva, you're a lost cause. There's nothing that can be done for you. So therefore the whole message of Mashiach now is not go and put flags everywhere and make that into Judaism. No. The whole message of Mashiach now is to inspire people to do tshuva now. Because the Mashiach can come now. He didn't change Judaism. He simply strengthened the same exact message. He didn't tell you that the whole point of coming to the world was just to have babies. No, you have to fulfill what Rabbi Yochanan said, which is to be in the world and serve Hashem, following the mitzvot. Because that was what was paskint to halacha. That's what the Rambam paskint. They paskint like Rabbi Yochanan. In Ilchot Yishut, chapter 6, halacha number 5. And the Shulchan Aruch said the same exact thing. In Even HaEzer, the Siman 1:6. What happened is, once the Lubavitcher Rebbe left this world, people simply started interpreting things according to their likings, instead of really getting the true message of that Mashiach now is saying, do tshuva now. They've turned Mashiach now into a motto, that Mashiach now is going to solve all the problems. And then you could do tshuva. And then you could do this. And then you could do that. Yeah, but what about the fact that if he actually did come now, many people will be in the place that the Baal Tanya warned us about, this Kafakela place. Many people would be in this Gehenom place. And he mentions a Gehenom of snow, a Gehenom of fire. What about that? Well, if they did Shuvah, they wouldn't have to worry about it. But if they just made their entire life into Mashiach Now, then they're literally causing a damage to Am Yisrael. Rabotai Yekarim, this is not the first time this mistake is made. This is not the first time this mistake is being made. In fact, there was a mistake made at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. At the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, there was the tribe of Ephraim who left Egypt before the salvation officially came. They left Egypt, they ran away, they figured that now is the salvation. Mashiach now. But did you get that information from God? No. Did you get that information from a prophet in the name of God? No. So what made you decide that Mashiach is now? Because we want it now. Oh, so you make the rules because you want, therefore it will be. You became God. The tribe of Ephraim left Egypt and died in the desert. 900 years later approximately, the prophet Yechezkel, in chapter 37, verse 9, Kadosh Baruch Hu brings them to the dry bones of all of these people that died, and says to him, prophecy to the spirit, prophecy ben Adam, and say to the spirit, thus says God the Lord, come, O spirit, from the four winds, and breathe into these who were slain, and they shall live. Kadosh Baruch Hu says to the prophet Yechezkel 900 years after they died, prophecy, and we'll bring them back to life. And that's exactly what happened, where the bones were as dry as can be, being in a desert there for 900 years. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought them back to life, put the flesh back on them, in order to prove that there is going to be a resurrection of the dead to that generation and thereafter. But the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin, page 92b, says, who are these people? Rav says these were the children of Ephraim, who calculated the time of redemption and made a mistake. And Shmuel says these were the ones who denied the resurrection of the dead. Meaning, the Gemara says that these people that died, these tribe of Ephraim that died in the desert, they were not Tzaddikim. They calculated Mashiach Now, and they were wrong. They denied part of the Torah. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished them and killed them in the desert. Rabbi Yehuda Ftaya HaKadosh says to us in chapter 88 of Minchat Yehuda, he says, so where were they for the last 900 years? Since they could not go to heaven and they couldn't even go to Gehenom, where were they? For the last 900 years, they were in Kafakela, Shem Yishmor V'Yatzil. Why? They said Mashiach Now. They simply decided that this needs to be now. Why? Because I want it to be now. What about following the will of Hashem and teaching people about the 13 principles of faith? Instead of putting yellow stickers everywhere. Says Mashiach Now, why don't you put stickers that says the 13 principles of faith and remind the people that their donations will not be a replacement for observing Shabbat. Instead of building more buildings, why don't we use the money to help people learn real Torah that's going to help them do tshuva? Teach them that there is going to be a reward and punishment. And if they do not cover their hair properly, cover their body properly, eat properly, do business properly, observe Shabbat properly, Mashiach Now is not going to help them. Mashiach will actually be the one that kills them. You see, Rabotai Kalim, this is not an innovation or some new thing. This is simply something that existed in the past. And we have examples in the Torah that tell us this is not the way of Judaism. And I've spoken to a few real Talmidim of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that were there, that were with them, that learned from them with many, many years. They don't say Mashiach Now. Harav Zarnel, that was my dear friend, Alav Shalom, he says this nonsense would have never existed at the time of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Why? Because the whole point of what he was teaching is the same exact thing of what all of Judaism has been teaching. We're here in this world to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're here in this world to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? That's our job. That's our role. Not to wait for Him to bring us to heaven. We're here in this world to earn heaven. We're here in this world to fulfill the mitzvot. Not to wait for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to pay our debt. We're here in this world to fulfill the entire Torah. Not to change it according to our likings. Those who changed it according to their likings, even if it was a minor detail. If it was Shlomit that simply decided that saying hello to anybody, it's not a big deal, even though it is. She got her deen. The son that came out of that rape also wanted to change the Torah. Small minor detail, what's the big deal? I'm not going to tell anybody. Just add me to the tribe of Dan. No. And when he got to know, he went against God and ended up losing everything. Instead of learning how to cope with the laws and see that they are for your benefit, he decided that if you're not going to change the Torah for me, I want no part of it. Thinking that if he has no part of the Torah, there is going to be something better for him. When you deny the Torah, you deny yourself heaven, you deny yourself everything. But it's just a small detail. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at every minor detail. There is no small detail. When the prophet Jeremiah was saying to people warnings, this false prophet came and told people, he's full of bad news. I'm going to give you good news. So what if he lies a little bit? That small little lie cost that false prophet his life, that he died less than 2 months later, and cost the entire nation of Israel to suffer further, and even more than they were suffering before. The tribe of Ephraim decided that Mashiach Now is the way to go. They ended up paying nearly 900 years of suffering in Kafakela. Each and every single one of them having destructive angels that have a desire to destroy them and to beat them as the only lust that they were created for. People love their opinion. But the moment you love your opinion more than HaKadosh Baruch Hu's, you're losing everything. As much as we would like for Mashiach Now to really be what they say it is, it simply doesn't exist. The goal of the message that the Lubavitcher Rebbe brought was Mashiach Now is tshuva now. Not Mashiach Now and tshuva later. Mashiach Now is tshuva now. Because if you do it later, it'll be too late. Perhaps, instead of sending me more messages and bothering many of my students and causing them untold harm, perhaps they should reflect and see that changing the Torah is to no one's benefit in the end. We have a track record of losers that changed the Torah, and not a single one of them benefited in the end. B'ezrat Hashem, this too will give chizuk to those that are looking for the truth. The sources are there, and there's many, many more. All you got to do is open a book, and you'll see it.